Welcome to the astrology forecast for the week of Monday, June 23rd through Sunday, June 29th, 2025. This week we continue to go through some pretty tumultuous and intense times. Something I noticed in the charts last week is that I just noticed a general theme, and I even said to myself, like, I wouldn't be surprised if certain things really did hit the fan last week, and that's both on a global scale as well as on a personal level with us individually, and really in a way I think this week coming up that we'll talk about in this forecast is simultaneously continuing a lot of the themes that we saw last week, but it's also really throwing us into a very new chapter. Like we have a new wave kind of coming in, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is last week we saw Jupiter square Saturn on the 15th of June. And then a few days later, Jupiter squared Neptune. So, in other words, Jupiter's been within orb of squaring Neptune and Saturn for quite some time now, for a couple of weeks. The reason why that's so important this week is because what we'll see is not only will the Sun catch up to Jupiter, the Sun will square Jupiter, and in doing so, will also kind of square Saturn and Neptune. But at basically the same time, the Moon will also catch up to that same part of the beginning of Cancer as well. So, in other words, for this new moon that we'll have on Wednesday the 25th at 4 degrees Cancer, this new moon, basically what we'll see is Sun, Moon, and Jupiter all conjunct at 3 or 4 degrees of Cancer, and all three of them will be within orb of that square to Saturn and Neptune at 1 and 2 degrees of Aries, respectively. So, so this is what I mean by, these intense events that we've seen, both personally as well as collectively last week. We could talk about, I try not to get too into specifics about like daily events or politics or anything like that on this channel, but I think we're probably all aware, there's a certain war that has broken out. There's also certain protests that have been happening over the past week. A lot of chaos, a lot of intensity going on that we could easily kind of attribute and correlate to these aspects. And as well, also, like I personally have had a lot go on this past week, and maybe you have too. Of course, that depends on your placements. But, as above, so below, we've all seen a lot happen the last week or so. So what we're going to see is whatever that intensity is for you, whether, whatever situation we're talking about, we're going to see more of that energy, more intensity, more newness coming in. But at the same time, things are going to move in a new direction. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. It's like this is part of a process that we're going through. First it started with the Jupiter squares. Now it's evolving and kind of taking a new turn with this new moon this week. I hope that makes sense. But what's interesting too is immediately after the new moon this week, on Thursday the 26th, Mercury will change signs as well. So again, that's pointing to like things are really starting to speed up. Things are intensifying here for sure. In other news, like the moon will be transiting from Gemini through Virgo this week. So generally, this would usually be a nice time for the moon. Moon does well in. I would argue Moon does pretty well in all of these signs: Gemini, Cancer, even Leo and Virgo. Moon does fairly well in. So typically we would be emotionally, kind of centered and balanced, emotionally aware in a week like this. But because of these like huge kind of outer planet aspects that are directly tied to the new moon, it's showing that we're really changing things. Like this would be the time where I don't know if you believe in like timelines and things like that, but this is where you're kind of choosing what timeline you're going to go on. I used to describe transits like this as this is kind of like the time to take the test, if that makes sense. And tests can be stressful. You might be stressed to know that you're going to take a test, but in a way, this is, I wouldn't say the easy part. This is stressful, it's chaotic, but at the same time, like we've done the work necessary. This is not really the time to like be practicing and doing the work to prepare, if that makes sense. This is the time to kind of just show up with whatever you've got and just do your best. You know what I mean? That's all you can do. Anyway, let's go through the day-to-day forecast and talk about some details here. So starting out with the chart for Monday, June 23rd, we start out with Moon crossing through Gemini, which is your homeboy sign. Honestly, I think that's pretty nice. I like that for this chart because since the Sun has entered Cancer, we really don't have a lot of air planets, only Pluto. Um, and by the way, Sun is newly in Cancer. I think you should all know that probably by now. But anyway, Moon is crossing through Gemini. I would usually say, Moon is enjoying the third house, therefore Moon is kind of enjoy in Gemini. Moon has a really fun time in Gemini, I think, generally speaking. This is a little bit different though, because not only are we still within orb of these, squares between Jupiter and now the Sun in Cancer versus Neptune and Saturn in Aries, as I mentioned. Not only are we experiencing those squares, which are adding a lot of tension and intensity to everything, but also, as the moon crosses through Gemini, it's wrapping up its lunar cycle. This is a dark moon at this point, so it's going to be, hardly visible at all. So, in other words, like, moon in Gemini would typically be a fun, really engaged time, but this is much darker, it's much heavier in nature than usual. This is more a time of, there's a lot of physical activity and newness with these aspects elsewhere. But with the moon wrapping up its cycle, this shows that we're actually in the process of manifesting something entirely different, if that makes sense. So again, there's some markers showing that we're in this process of change that's taking weeks. But on the other hand, we're also on the cusp or on the verge of a completely new cycle that's about to come in this week as well. Both are true at the same time. So really intense stuff. Today, on Monday the 23rd, Sun at 2 degrees Cancer makes that exact square to Neptune at 2 degrees Aries. So this on its own would usually be, noteworthy. It would usually be kind of just a minor point. But again, because there are other conjunctions involved, Sun conjunct Jupiter, Neptune conjunct Saturn, we've got more planets kind of piling on either side to the square. Squares, as you probably know, are the most action-oriented aspect, I think it would be safe to say. Any square aspects, regardless of the signs involved, regardless of the planets, they push us. They can be stressful because they're pushing us to make change. They are kind of riling things up, if that makes sense. And I've personally noticed that squares between Cancer and Aries in particular are especially chaotic because we're combining water with fire. Water and fire make steam, which clouds everything. It makes things, we can't see things. Things aren't clear. Things aren't really making sense. There's just so much going on. But also, Cancer and Aries are both cardinal signs. So, they're both individualistic in their own way. And they're both actually leaders. Cancer doesn't always seem like a leader, but Cancer is a leader. They lead through emotion. But anyway, that's a talk for another time. But my point is, Cancer and Aries are both leading something and they're both initiating something, but they have very different styles of doing so. Aries initiates in a really brash, direct way, very forward, very simple, right? It's very black and white. Cancer is a little bit more subtle. Cancer wants to take its time. It does want to assert itself, but it wants to kind of take the pulse on everything around it first. It wants to like slowly navigate its way through kind of intuitively and emotionally. It's much more sensitive and much more like cautious or conservative compared to Aries, which is more impulsive, more reckless. So, so you have these two that they actually do have certain things in common, but in this case, the commonalities between Cancer and Aries actually make them clash harder because the only things they have in common is their kind of individuality and their leadership. But again, the way they are leaders, the way they're individuals is dramatically different. So anyway, we have these, to me, the Sun square Neptune aspect, you really can't look at it on its own. It's really Sun conjunct Jupiter, both squaring Saturn and Neptune. Sun square Neptune on its own would indicate some kind of clash between like reality and perhaps how we see things, our perspective, or perhaps like what we intend for things, what we want things to be is dramatically different than how they are. There's some kind of schism between like the collective consciousness versus the objective reality, and it's really difficult to see. In this country we have clearly a political divide, and I know that that's probably true in many other countries as well. And it's interesting how, looking at Cancer and Aries, looking at the planets, Jupiter and Sun in Cancer versus Neptune and Saturn in Aries, I can see like each part, without getting into specifics, like each side that's kind of clashing right now. Each side is experiencing all of these transits, if that makes sense. So it's like it kind of, in some ways, one side might be kind of like Neptune and Saturn and Aries, but at the same time, that same side is also like Jupiter and Sun in a different way, but they are clashing, if that makes sense. The clashing or the squares also just kind of stir up chaos in general. So this isn't going to be in one particular area. It's not just political. It's not just about war. It's not just about any one particular thing. This is about everything. This is, again, as above, so below. We are all experiencing this in our own way. We are all going through some kind of battle right now with ourselves, or maybe with other people, or some other part of our life. There's some kind of battle. We need to make some kind of change. And again, it's not just as a people or as a society, it's also individually. We're going through these changes or this intensity. It's kind of like, this is going to sound really cliche, but it's almost like life is like a river. And, some parts of it get a little slow and steady. And, now we're in the rapids. Now, this river is twisting and turning, and it's steep, it's rocky. So it's really difficult to see. We can't see exactly how it's going to go. I want to continue on. So this Neptune, Saturn, Neptune, there's so many planets involved with this aspect, I keep tripping over it. This Sun Neptune aspect, again, I really don't look at it individually. This is not the peak of this energy. The peak is going to come on the new moon when we have 3 planets in Cancer squaring 2 planets in Aries. So I'm going to continue on to Tuesday. But generally speaking, Monday is going to start out intense. But again, with the moon crossing through Gemini on Monday and Tuesday, it's almost like we can sense a certain kind of like foreboding or like an ominous energy. Like on the one hand, there's this breakthrough, this breakout of energy. Things are intense, things are happening. But again, the moon is going through its kind of dark phase. It's going through, you could compare it to like Pisces in a way, like it's going through that final stage. So again, it's like that the moon's energy is kind of leading up to something. It's hinting at something. The moon's energy shows that there's actually a lot going on, not just physically, but non-physically as well. There's something new that's about to be kind of birthed or manifested into physical reality. So again, to put it shortly, on the one hand, there is a lot of action. Wherever you work or whatever you do, you might notice a lot of action or change in your immediate surroundings on Monday. But again, there's a lot going on in the world as well. But again, there's more to come. We're building up to something, for better or for worse. Tuesday, June 24th, this energy kind of continues. Moon continues through Gemini basically all day. Depending on your time zone, Moon will enter Cancer around midnight, the night of Tuesday going into Wednesday. So basically, most of us, we have Moon in Gemini all day Tuesday. So again, what would usually be a lighthearted, fun, kind of curious and intellectual energy is uncharacteristically kind of dark, foreboding, heavy. It's hinting at something. There's something coming. That's the best way I can put it. We have 2 aspects on Tuesday. Sun conjoins Jupiter at 3 degrees Cancer, and then Mercury squares Chiron. So Mercury from 26 Cancer in the early part of the day squares Chiron at 26 Aries. And so, what would I say about this? Let's start with Mercury square Chiron. So this is almost like a side note, but it is an important side note. It is also a Cancer-Aries square. It's just happening, toward the end of the signs rather than the beginning. So in a way, you could say there are, well, it really depends on how you count it. There are many squares happening right now between Cancer and Aries. So in other words, this is a clash between the feminine and the masculine. This is a clash between Mars or Sun energy versus like Moon energy, I guess you could say. This is a clash between taking a risk and branching out into something new versus let's do it the old way, let's not take any risks at all. And what I'm saying, you can hopefully apply this to many different areas, and it should be true. But with Mercury squaring Chiron in particular, um, okay, I'm not gonna lie, this looks very tumultuous to me. Chiron in Aries, I think, is kind of like this crying, screaming baby in all of us. All of us, since 2018, when Chiron entered Aries, all of us have become perhaps, more aware of our own traumas, our own plight, our own suffering. Chiron in Aries is kind of a self-pitying transit, I would say. That's not all bad. It can be good to have a voice and to speak up for yourself and to say, no, I'm not going to be passive anymore. I have a story to tell. I'm going to speak my truth, so to speak. However, on the other hand, I always say Chiron and Aries, it relates to protest. Protesting can be good, don't get me wrong. It can also be destructive, right? Saying your truth and just throwing it out there with no tact or no forethought at all, that can be good. Maybe that kind of impulsive energy is what's needed to get your message out. Or on the other hand, maybe your message is, or maybe what you're doing is just causing further destruction, further trauma, further misunderstanding. It really just depends, but this is a very intense energy. So that's been going on since 2018. Now we have Mercury in Cancer squaring Chiron. So it's clashing. It's bringing this emotional energy. Like Mercury in Cancer, I think it wants to be practical. It wants to go back to Mercury in Cancer says, like, let's just go back to the basics. How do we feel in the moment? What are we just thinking, like offhand? Can't we just go back to what we're already familiar with? Can't we go back to what we know is safe and what we know is true? But that's completely clashing with Chiron and Aries, which says, no, I'm not going to do the safe route anymore. I want to speak my truth, regardless of how it makes other people feel, or regardless of if it causes further destruction. So it's a clash. It's a whenever you have square aspects, it's kind of like you're blending oil and water. They just don't really mix well. Um, so it's difficult to find some kind of compromise. How do we blend these energies? How do we meet in the middle? That may be difficult or even impossible to do so. So Tuesday, any kind of aspects with Chiron, especially squares like this, I always think of protest. That's the first thing I think of. So Tuesday, I wouldn't be surprised if there were more protests or more. This could also inflame certain events and certain like kind of activities that have already been going on. Because a different way of looking at it would just say, I talked about Chiron in great detail. There's a lot of passion there, tons of passion. But Chiron, or excuse me, Mercury in Cancer, it's bringing up like, how do I feel? How do I feel in my gut or in my heart? It's very kind of primal, I would say. So again, we're kind of playing with fire here. This could be constructive or conducive to something positive, but this also looks very unpredictable. It looks very chaotic, to say the least, for sure. Also today, Tuesday the 24th, I mentioned Sun is crossing over Jupiter. So this is a kind of Jupiter Cazimi. Cazimi is, my understanding, is basically when any planet conjoins the Sun. I mentioned in the last week's forecast, I believe, that any kind of conjunction to the Sun, it works a little bit differently than most conjunctions do. Most conjunctions strengthen both planets involved, or whatever planets are involved. They kind of team up, they group together, and if you were to see it in the sky, it's going to be a brighter star because it's not just one planet, not just one moving star, so to speak. It's like multiple moving stars all together, so it makes a brighter star, right? That's not true here, though, because with Jupiter crossing the Sun, it Jupiter, even Jupiter, as big and bright as Jupiter is completely blinded out, totally obscured by the Sun. So this is strange. I would imagine we could experience some kind of burnout of Jupiter energy. I think this might be especially true because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So now with Sun crossing Jupiter, we may experience too much of a good thing. So maybe it's too much of that primal, emotional kind of Cancer energy. Maybe it's too much expansion, though. Jupiter is typically, Jupiter is a benefic. It typically makes life easier, more fun, more joyous. Jupiter makes life good. However, Jupiter can also expand things. We may have too much of a good thing with Jupiter. There could be overindulgence, or, um, just, partying too much, for example, or just like with this aspect in particular, we may be it may really expand how we're feeling. And I think with the current environment, that could be reckless or dangerous. I think feelings themselves, I kind of think of feeling, thought, and intuition as different kind of senses, right? They can all be accurate and we use them to kind of navigate the world, but they all have their flaws as well. If you're just relying on one or even two of those faculties, you may have blind spots, right? So I think here with this like over, focus on huge emotion, grandiose emotion, really indulging in your own emotion, um, it it may be just very dramatic for sure. Another thing with these Cancer transits is that Cancer makes us more tribal. We want to pull back and we want to put the walls up, so to speak, and stay in our like castle or fortress. We want to stay with our people, so to speak, whatever that means. Like whether it's people you identify with politically or any other kind of grouping. Like we all get into these kind of little groups, little tribes with Cancer transit. So Jupiter, being conjunct by Sun in Cancer, this could also show we're really like kind of pulling back, we're being defensive, and again, whatever like my people means, I don't even know what that means, but things can get tricky, things can get kind of dangerous with that kind of thinking as well. But again, even the Sun conjunct Jupiter in this case, just like what I said about Sun squaring Neptune, like it's we can break this down aspect by aspect like this, but really in my opinion the main event is the new moon, because all of these aspects that we're talking about are still going to be within orb of each other on the new moon. And the moon is it's really going to kind of show even more of a it's going to expand things even more. It's going to show that spotlight on this area even more on Wednesday. So it's not necessarily about Sun square Neptune. It's not about Sun conjunct Jupiter. It's about all of it happening at the same time this week. That's what's really throwing everything around and really making things dramatic here. Going to Wednesday, June 25th. This is the. Sorry about that. That was an accidental right click. But Wednesday, this is the big day. This is. I've. I mean, it's impossible to exactly predict how things are going to go, but I would think this is the day where things are really, really likely to hit the fan, as I said. We've already seen a lot of that. And you could point to, Monday, Sun squaring Neptune. You could point to Tuesday, Sun conjoining Jupiter. These are also days where, major events could happen. But again, Wednesday really stands out to me. Wednesday's a new moon. I know everyone likes to tune in whenever there's a new moon or a full moon. Like we're aware that these are days where things change, right? This is a new lunar cycle. This is especially potent because I'm just getting so excited. Like it's especially potent for multiple reasons, multiple huge reasons. So one is that with this grouping of Sun, Moon, Jupiter conjunct, I actually want to go back and see if I can find like something closer to the exact chart of the new moon. So here you can see pretty close. This is 8 a.m. Eastern time on Wednesday the 25th. You can see Jupiter at 3 degrees Cancer, Sun at 4 degrees Cancer, Moon at 5 degrees Cancer. Because the moon travels so fast, I'd only have to go even just 30 minutes before, and you'll see this basically exact new moon. But why is this so intense? So with this new moon, it's pretty tightly conjunct Jupiter. The new moon's at 4 degrees Cancer, conjunct Jupiter at 3 degrees Cancer. This is a huge deal, even if we just forgot the rest of the chart. Forget about Aries, forget about Neptune and Saturn. Let's not even focus on that right now. Even just this right here is a big deal, because not only is Moon at home in Cancer, so it's stronger here, but also, as I mentioned earlier, Jupiter is exalted here too. So the Sun is kind of sandwiched between these planets that are really strong right now, if that makes sense. So in other words, a new moon in Cancer is very potent. It's a huge new beginning. It's just a pivotal time of the year as well. We're really launching into summer, and we're launching into the half of the year where the daylight decreases. And so that does have kind of psychological effects on us. When the daylight is decreasing, I think, are subconsciously aware of that. I think we're more likely to conserve and to restrict and to plan and things like that. Because we are conserving things. We also want to make the most of the good times while they last as well. So that's also a theme that will continue through summer and fall. But anyway, so with this new moon, we may be very aware of our emotions for better and for worse. The moon is not a benefic or malefic energy. So what that means is the moon itself doesn't really make life dramatically easier or more fun. It also doesn't make life dramatically more difficult or challenging. It's just an overall neutral energy. Moon is the energy of emotions, and emotions themselves, emotions are good, emotions are bad, emotions are somewhere in between. They run the full range here. So we're combining Moon conjunct Sun and Jupiter. Again, like I said, Jupiter expands things. So it's almost like we have this really, really potent new beginning with this Cancer and Moon energy, but it's being blown up and expanded even more by Jupiter. I honestly think the moon loves this. Like, the moon likes to get carried away with feelings. It likes to get carried away with things, and it's almost kind of a catch 22, right? Or it's a contradiction, because Cancer does want to be cautious and conservative, but Cancer it also loves to get carried away with emotion, whether it be its own emotions or maybe the emotions it feels with connections to other people or experiences. So anyway, so this on its own, I think, is a very intense new beginning. Anytime any planets conjoin, it's a new beginning. We perhaps see that the most viscerally with Moon conjoining the Sun. That's a new beginning. It's a new moon. But any planets beginning, even Moon crossing over Jupiter or Sun crossing over Jupiter, those are starting cycles as well. So in other words, this is a massive, massive, massive new beginning. Plus, I've already talked about the squares. So again, Jupiter, Sun, Moon, all at 3 or 4 degrees Cancer. They're very well within orb of these squares to Saturn and Neptune at 1 to 2 degrees Aries. So what are the odds that you have, not just one conjunction or one square happening, or maybe a conjunction and a square, but basically three planets all conjunct in one area, all squaring two planets conjunct in another area. Three planets in Cancer, two planets in Aries. So again, I think I've talked throughout this forecast kind of generally about the themes. This is complicated enough. I'm not going to break it down by each planet because that would take way too long. But generally speaking, this is just a huge clash of energy. It's very volatile. It's a water-fire clash. Water and fire are the more emotional, more passionate elements. I think they also have more creative potential as well because of that exact emotion and that passion. So in other words, it's kind of like, I always come up with weird analogies while I'm doing these forecasts, but it made me think of a lot of, you know how, like, I don't know if you know mythology at all, but in different world, like different culture mythologies, sometimes the world begins from like a mist or from some kind of chaos, right? So that's kind of what this makes me think of. It's like something will be born from this, and perhaps, this may lead to more stability in the future. But right now, we're going through that creation process, and part of this, it's not just creative, much of it is destructive as well, don't get me wrong. But sometimes it's difficult to exactly see the difference between the two. Anytime something is destroyed or something ends, there's typically some kind of beginning that comes out of that, right? So we're going through this kind of painful process right now, again, both individually as well as collectively. What I find interesting is that this grouping in Cancer, Jupiter, Sun, Moon, as we talked about, these are much more happy, much more at home compared to Saturn and Neptune and Aries. Even the Sun does fairly well in Cancer. This is the first sign following the summer solstice. So, yes, the daylight is decreasing now. That is a huge bummer for the Sun. But, there's still tons of light. This is, the beginning of the fall, so there's still lots of light. So I don't think Sun does terribly awful in Cancer. And especially, again, moon's at home in Cancer, Jupiter's exalted. Compare that to Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Saturn is in fall in Aries, and Neptune's not technically in detriment or fall in Aries, but I just think it's a very strange kind of mismatch. Neptune prefers signs that are soft and fuzzy. It prefers to kind of blur the lines. Aries is very clear. Aries is very straightforward. Aries is black and white. It's either correct or it's not. Like, what is the answer? What are we doing? We either do it or we don't do it. Aries sees things very simply, and that's what allows Aries to be so confident and so outgoing. Neptune, as you probably know, Neptune is about as different from that as possible. Neptune says, no, we don't need to take action. Let's just kind of go with the flow and everything's all good and let's just kind of blend with whatever's happening. So anyway, my point is Neptune, in my opinion, is really out of place in Aries, and Saturn is in fall there, so it's obviously out of place as well. So that's where it's so interesting. If this was kind of like a battle, I think it would be very clear Moon, Jupiter, and Sun would win against Saturn and Neptune. Um, you have this kind of catch 22 where Saturn typically represents whatever the old power structure is. It also represents the authority figures. Um, but in this case, the old power structure and the authority figures are out of place. In other words, Saturn is out of place. Saturn's dysfunctional. It's not strong. It's not acting like it normally does. I also attribute, we've been experiencing some really new, like dramatically different policies, like economically at the very least. Um, and so it kind of makes sense. Saturn and Aries, the authority figures are not acting as we expect them to. They're not acting like they normally do. They're acting much differently. Um, so anyway, so there's this clash between all these feelings and hopes and dreams, and also just the status of maybe the people versus like the power structures and the establishment, if that makes sense. I think that's all I'm gonna say about this. Like for the average person going through this, you're gonna experience this as a crazy day. Like whatever you're doing in life, whether you're at work or at home, this would be a day where you're just kind of looking around like, what is going on? Like people are acting differently than they usually do. It wouldn't surprise me if people are maybe more emotional, more volatile, more unpredictable than they might characteristically be. Pets and animals in particular might be bouncing off the walls. It's very unusual for a new moon. Usually on a new moon, things are more chill. It's a time to like reflect and process things, and it's a time of manifestation. What's interesting with this new moon is that all of that actually is true. Like, although it may not feel that way as you're going through it, it is a new moon. That is still true. It's just that this new moon is being dominated by these Cancer Aries squares. So, in other words, like, it is a time where we are processing something. We are bringing in this energy from the subconscious or from the ethereal, from the non-physical realms. We are bringing that in, manifesting that, I guess you could say. But at the same time, there's also a lot of action that is happening at the same time as well. These cycles are like clashing together, I guess you could say, because again, we have multiple new cycles starting between Moon, Sun, and Jupiter, but we also have this quarter point, this square in other cycles with Neptune and Saturn. So yeah, this is a time of dramatic change for sure, both individually as well as collectively. Let's go to Thursday, the 26th. So Moon continues through Cancer, so it's not like it's not like we just like throw a grenade and then like run away and we're done, and then the explosion happens somewhere else. Like this is something we are going through. This is taking time. Okay, so I do think that peak happens on Wednesday, but Thursday may also be a crazy day. Thursday we do, especially late Thursday Eastern time. We also have Moon squaring Chiron. And when I say Eastern time, I use Eastern time because most of my viewers are Americans, but some of them are Europeans, and then there's a smaller amount elsewhere in the world as well. If you're anywhere in North or South America or Europe or Africa for that matter, you're going to be close enough to the Eastern time zone that it's going to be fairly accurate for you. Anyway, I don't know why I felt like the need to explain that, but my point is, wherever you are in the world, Moon's going to be squaring Chiron probably late Thursday or maybe early Friday. So that will bring up more volatility, plus just look just very in general, like rather than looking at the specifics just for a moment, just seeing the chart in general right now, we have 4 planets in Cancer, we have 3 planets in Aries if you include Chiron. So just in general, if you look at like by sign, lots of Cancer planets squaring lots of Aries planets by sign, in the simplest way we can look at that. So again, there still continues to be a lot of volatility. I forgot to mention one last thing for the new moon on Wednesday. The new moon also sextiles Mars as well. I don't know. Let's just go back to that real quick. So the new moon at 4 degrees Cancer sextiles to the degree Mars at 4 degrees Virgo. So that's kind of like a moot point, or not a moot point, but it doesn't steal the show the way that the squares do with Neptune and Saturn. However, a sextile to Mars is an exact aspect. It's a Ptolemaic, it's a major aspect. Um, and now that I think about it, I actually just noticed that there's a yod between the new moon in Cancer, sextiling Mars in Virgo, and both of them quincunxing Pluto in Aquarius. So, okay, so let's dive into this a little bit more. So the sextile to Mars shows that we may be very able to take action right now, for better or for worse. Mars is a malefic. It can make life more chaotic, for sure. I do think Mars is the most benefic of the malefics, if that makes sense. Like, in other words, Mars, well, so what I noticed is that all the benefic planets are warm. Sun, Venus, Jupiter are all physically, literally warm bodies compared to the malefics. Saturn, Pluto, Mars are all cold. Mars, though, is not the coldest planet in the solar system by any means. Mars can get pretty warm. Supposedly, it can get in the 70s at the equator. So my point is, Mars, it's not always a bad guy. Mars can bring, much needed assertiveness. It can get things done. We may really benefit from Mars energy, especially if we don't have a lot in our natal charts. So anyway, so Mars in Virgo is showing that we're very capable of getting shit done at this time. So when it comes to all these changes and that can be overwhelming, it can be chaotic, we may be very emotional right now, but we're also very productive. Okay. But what this yod aspect means, so a yod is one sextile with 2 quincunxes. In this case, it's like multiple sextiles because we have 3 planets here, 1 planet here, but both points are quincunxing Pluto. So what's interesting is, besides all the squares to Aries, which is where I was immediately drawn there. That's where the most intensity is. To also have a yod at the same time, the yod in this case is pointing to Pluto. So this is showing that we are in the process of completely transforming our groups, our what's the word? Collectives. How do we collect as people? How do we group together? How do we unify? Or do we unify? Maybe we don't unify. That's what Pluto in Aquarius. As Pluto goes through Aquarius, our faith in the groups that we have assimilated into, as well as our faith in technology, especially technology having to do with information or air travel, all of that faith is going to be completely eroded by the end of the transit. And I'm pretty confident in that analysis. It's just like how Pluto went through Capricorn. By the end of Pluto's transit through Capricorn, our faith in our governments, our leaders, even our financial system has been completely eroded, right? So same thing is going to happen. It's just with Aquarian themes as Pluto goes through Aquarius. So anyway, so with this yod pointing at Pluto, I think much of this chaos it's pointing at this process of reconfiguring how do we deal with information, how do we deal with technology, how do we deal with air travel, how do we deal with groups. Think of all the different groups of people, companies, unions, religions, even, I don't know, social media. What other groups are there? There's lots of them. Countries, states, whatever it is. We have all these groups. But I was actually just talking last night about how, like, so much of our society was set up during and immediately after World War II, back in the 40s and 50s. Much of it is outdated. It's crumbling. It was clearly made for a world that doesn't exist anymore. We have a different world now. So I think it's pretty obvious to anyone, regardless of your beliefs. I would hope we can all at least agree that things are not working now. Things are chaotic. We clearly have to make some kind of change. It's just that I think where we disagree is like what change needs to be made, how much change. Clearly there's corruption. What in what direction is the corruption coming from? Like we can disagree on these different details, but it's very clear we're currently experiencing some kind of like revolution of the world, right? So this new moon is playing a large part of that. It's basically my interpretation of this yod. Let me know, I do my best not to follow any other astrological channels because I don't want to subconsciously copy anyone. But if you feel like commenting any insights that you've thought of or that you've heard, I'd really be curious to hear anyone's experience or thoughts on particularly this new moon and all the aspects it's making. This new moon is just making so many aspects. It's really wild. So I'm sure, I feel like I covered a lot here, but there may be even more that I may not have touched on. But I at least covered all the aspects for you. So, okay, Thursday we've got a few different aspects happening. So let's talk about the sun first. So technically, the sun sextiles Mars on Thursday. So we've got that new moon, sun and moon on Wednesday, basically sextiling Mars. But then sun itself doesn't make that exact sextile until Thursday. Um, so yeah, again, sextiles are harmonious. This chart as a whole is not harmonious. Like our experience in general is not going to be harmonious. This is going to continue to be pretty chaotic. However, if we just look at Sun and Mars, they are working together, I guess you could say. Um, Sun in Cancer, Mars in Virgo, these energies actually blend together pretty well. Mars in Virgo adds some much needed structure and support and productivity to Sun in Cancer. And Sun in Cancer kind of waters the earth, so to speak. Sun in Cancer is very nurturing. It adds that nurturing and kind of emotionally stabilizing, emotionally aware quality of Cancer. So, in other words, like this is a really great aspect for being productive, especially being productive in a way that helps our emotional or spiritual well being, being productive in a way that's truly wise. And there's a lot of foresight in these placements as well. Virgo has foresight through its analytical ability, Cancer has foresight through its intuitive and emotional intelligences. So, together, you can have really great kind of foresight and direction when you combine earth and water signs like this. Um, so that's the Sun Mars sextile. So really great for being productive, getting something done, especially being truly wise, like truly cautious, but also productive. Um, in other news, Mercury is up to some stuff today. So first, Mercury at 29 degrees Cancer sextiles Uranus at 29 Taurus. So again, we have another sextile. That's really great, really harmonious. I still think the overall picture is gonna be chaotic. We do have this bittersweetness though because of the sextiles. The sextiles add a little bit of harmonious energy, but I do think overall things are dominated by the four planets in Cancer being squared by the three planets in Aries. Cancer Aries square, very tumultuous. But again, it's like we have this little, I don't know, little godsend, like little sweet note, I guess you could say, with these Earth sextiles supporting the Cancer placement. So I don't know. These are really wild charts this week. Let's just put it that way. Okay, but let's look at the Mercury Uranus sextile. So any aspects to Uranus will likely channel in like new awakenings and changes in perspective, but especially any kind of Mercury Uranus aspect. This is really great for having intuitive flashes or informational downloads. We can suddenly realize things, we can figure things out. New messages or information may just come to us seemingly out of nowhere. That's pretty common with Mercury Uranus aspects. What's particularly interesting about this is that both Mercury and Uranus are near the end of their respective signs. Mercury will enter Leo actually today, which brings me to my next point. And then Uranus, is obviously much slower. Uranus is going to enter Gemini just in a few weeks, though, just in July. So, but anyway, so they're both at the end of their signs right now. So this is intense. They're both finalizing things. So, in other words, like we may experience some kind of flashback or some kind of echo. Um, we may be at the end of some kind of experience or some kind of cycle, so there may be some kind of test, so to speak. Like, are you truly done with a certain habit or person or situation that maybe isn't what's best for you? You may have some kind of realization today of something new you could do that's different. And then that's what's going to lead us again to, we're really moving into a new chapter this week. I feel like I say that a lot on this channel, but it's because it's true. There's just so many cycles always ending and beginning. We rarely go through a month or two of relative peace before things ramp up again. So anyway, that's what we're seeing here. We talked a lot about that really crazy new moon on Wednesday. Thursday, immediately, pretty much immediately after Mercury sextiles Uranus, it enters Leo. So again, that's showing new energy. It's a new sign. It's a fire sign. It's just it's showing that we're moving on mentally, intellectually. We're ready to be a little bit more assertive and to take action. Mercury in Cancer was more about kind of just like mulling things over, focusing on how we feel, and kind of checking in with ourselves. Now, as Mercury enters Leo, this is much more external. It's much more outgoing, much more engaged with the outside physical world. And I think Mercury in Leo is also much more able and willing to take risks as well. It's much more, like I said, assertive. It's much more adventurous, much more experimental. Leo does want a certain amount of security, like Cancer does, but it's also more able and willing to be adventurous and a little impulsive and dramatic. Um, okay, let's go to Friday. I do want to say though, a theme we're going to see for the rest of the week is that because we have so many outer planets at the beginning of their signs, anytime an inner planet like Mars, or in this case Mercury, enters a sign, it's going to aspect a lot of outer planets. So what I mean by that is, as Mercury enters Leo, what we're going to see over the next few days is one by one Mercury's going to aspect different signs. So first Mercury will trine Saturn, then it'll trine Neptune, and then it'll oppose Pluto. Mercury will also make a semi-sextile to Jupiter as well. So in other words, like, look at the outer planets. Like, Pluto's at 3 Aquarius, Neptune's at 2 Aries, Saturn's at 1 Aries, and then Jupiter's at 3 Cancer. Uranus, on the other hand, is at the very end of its sign. Uranus is also about to enter a new sign. We've had so many outer planets enter signs, either at the end of last year in the case of Pluto, or at the first half of this year, like Saturn, Neptune, and soon to be Uranus and Jupiter as well. We've just had so many planets change signs that it's very interesting. And again, it has huge impacts for an inner planet like Mercury when it changes signs. So let's look at that. So first of all, for Friday, June 27th, Moon leaves Cancer and enters Leo pretty much halfway through the day. And in doing so, Moon also, Moon will conjoin Mercury and oh, this is so complicated. So basically, Mercury and the Moon at the beginning of Leo are both semi-sextiling Jupiter. Both of them just sextiled Uranus a day or two before. Mercury and the Moon are also trining Neptune and Saturn, and Mercury and the Moon are also opposing Pluto. So Friday's going to be a huge turning point, okay? Uh, as I said, Mercury is going to be technically making these aspects to the outer planets like one by one through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But because the moon happens to be in the same area on Friday, that's really amplifying all of these aspects much more because, again, all these aspects, although they aren't technically happening on Friday, they are within orb. They are close enough, if that makes sense. So Friday is going to be a huge turning point, huge changing point. I think there could be some really valuable information that's kind of spreading around on Friday. We might become aware of major events that have just transpired either on the same day or maybe over the last couple of weeks. We might finally get some awareness on some of this chaos that's been happening. We might be able to make sense of things. Also there's this direct connection to the changes that are going on with groups, with like, for example, I just saw this poll that showed that it's not even necessarily just about left versus right anymore. Like people's beliefs in the parties themselves is at an all time low. Like no one, you know, you're less likely to be happy to be Democrat or Republican. Like people just aren't happy with the whole system, if that makes sense. Um, so anyway, so that's just one example I thought of. You know, things are there's clearly a huge need for change with these groups that we subscribe to. Um, let's see. Okay, I'm gonna move on, but you know, again, just thinking about the average person going through Friday, I would imagine your personal life is there's some kind of plot twist on Friday. There's some kind of change. This is not for most people. It's not going to be as intensely dramatic as Wednesday was, but this is you know things are evolving. The story is evolving. The we're entering this new phase, this new wave. This new wave is kind of hitting us, and we're kind of adapting to it and reacting to it and moving on to a new level, if that makes sense. You know, Mercury and the Moon are trining Neptune and Saturn, which is really interesting. Um, so it shows that although Neptune and Saturn, I think, were immediately not favored, and really the Cancer placements were favored. Now I think there's almost a switch. So in other words, like if you do view it as like a battle, whatever side was supposedly like kind of winning at first, I think the tides may be turning now, if that makes sense. And again, you can apply that to whatever situation in the world or in your life. The tide is turning on Friday, basically, is how I see that. Okay, let's look at Saturday. So Saturday, the 28th, Moon continues through Leo. It's kind of a bummer because Leo is typically such a fun, happy sign. Moon and Mercury in Leo, I think, would typically be a lot of fun. But I don't know, maybe some of us are having fun today. I'm not saying you can't. We can have fun today, but there's also just so much going on, both personally as well as in the world, as you know. Um, Mercury on Saturday does make the exact trine to Neptune. So this is channeling in some kind of what's the new vision? What's the new dream? Neptune and Aries can be very idealistic, very optimistic, but it's also showing we have a new attitude, a new wave, a new vision, so to speak. So Mercury and Leo is kind of like maybe grounding that, or it's still very fiery. This is a fire trine, so both planets are a little idealistic and very expansive and maybe dramatic at times. But Mercury is still Mercury. Mercury is kind of making sense of this new vision for us a little bit. So again, really, especially on Friday, but also Saturday and Sunday, I would really pay attention to what kind of information are you picking up on. Um, you know, again, whether it be in your personal life or elsewhere. It's funny I say that because I've actually made the choice recently to like basically tune out of like I don't follow any news. Not only do I not follow astrology like I told you, other than like through myself directly. I also don't follow any news channels. I don't want to. Any information I pick up on from the people around me, if it intrigues me, I will search for more information on that particular subject. But I don't follow any kind of feed of news. And I think it's the reason why I'm bringing it up is because I would highly recommend it. I think it's really beneficial for your mental health not to be like taking in all this. You know, obviously it's great to be informed, but what's the point of being informed on this? Uh, I think it can be psychologically damaging, and we may feel powerless. You know, what's the point of being informed on stuff that we have no power over, right? So I don't know. Maybe you feel differently. If so, please let me know. But anyway, I just thought it was funny. I was saying, pay attention to what information you find. I'm still definitely saying that for sure. I think there may be really valuable information that's spreading around. Like I said, especially Friday, but maybe Saturday or Sunday. But be selective with that too, I guess, is all I'm saying. Okay, lastly, let's talk about Sunday. So Sunday, Moon continues through Leo, and then just afternoon Eastern time, Moon enters Virgo, where it joins Mars. And it's kind of funny, like, look what's going on between these two areas. Like, Sun and Jupiter are still pretty close together toward the beginning of Cancer, and then Moon and Mars are now close at the beginning of Virgo. So they're kind of sextiling, right? And again, in doing so, they're making this kind of loose quincunx, or this, well, they're both quincunxing, but in doing so, they're making this yod with Pluto. Um, so multiple yods this week. Um, Yods are also called the finger of God. I've heard it's because it's like God is giving you the finger because yods create this. I used to say the yod is my favorite aspect. I don't know if I'd say that anymore because I want peace in my life. But yods are definitely interesting to study astrologically because they're very bittersweet and they're very chaotic. A yod is one or more sextiles. In this case, it's like two or four sextiles depending on how you count it. Um, a yod is one or more sextiles with two quincunxes. So usually it's one sextile with two quincunxes, if that makes sense. It's kind of like I believe it's an isosceles triangle. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. So anyway, the sextile aspect brings harmony, right? Sextiles bring harmony. Virgo and Cancer in this case are different enough to complement each other, but similar enough to blend readily, right? Virgo provides structure for Cancer. Cancer's nurturing for Virgo. They really soak up each other's energies. They balance each other. They like each other. That's great. That's harmonious. That's fun. Sextiles are sexy. But they're also simultaneously making quincunxes to a different point, in this case Pluto and Aquarius. Quincunxes are 150 degree, yeah, 150 degrees or 5 signs apart. One, two, three, four, five. I haven't thought about this in a while, so I'm like testing myself. But that is correct. 150 degrees or 5 signs apart. And any signs, any points that quincunx each other have, I would say, as little in common as possible. So Cancer and Aquarius, for example, one's yin, one's yang, one's cardinal, one's fixed, one's summer, one's winter, one is, what else could you say? One's water, one's air. They have literally nothing in common. They have as little in common as you possibly could find. Similar situation with Virgo and Aquarius. Different polarity, different modality, different elements, you name it, right? Different season. So that's where this creates the situation where these 2 points are representing such different energies, you can't blend them together. Even a square aspect, you could find something in common. Like any square aspect, both signs will have the same modality, right? Like I talked about with Cancer and Aries, they're both cardinal. Even though that may make them clash more, at least they do have that in common. So there could be maybe theoretically some kind of common ground. With quincunx energy, you don't typically have that. So the yod aspect creates this situation that is bittersweet. There is this sweetness to it, but there's also this dysfunction and this problem that doesn't have any solution. So oftentimes with the quincunx, all you can really do is kind of just wait it out and maybe learn from it and just go, okay, that was interesting. Like, I don't know what to do with that energy. That was dysfunctional. Maybe I hopefully learned something from that. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's a problem without a solution. So anyway, so again, that's relevant for Wednesday with the new moon. It's also relevant for Sunday as the moon enters Virgo. And also one more thing: whenever you have a yod aspect, the point that is being quincunxed by the other 2 points is kind of like the main. It's literally an arrow that's pointing to that point, if that makes sense. So in this case, Pluto at 3 degrees Aquarius, that's like the focal point. That's where all the action, the energy is being delivered or pointing at. So again, this is radically transforming our societies, and it's radically, I think, maybe damaging our trust or our faith in, like I said, groups, technology, information, etc. Anything you can kind of associate with Aquarius, Pluto's showing us like, hey, you may have had this trust or this faith in this area that is rotten. It's not what you thought it was. Just like we learned not to trust our governments with Pluto and Capricorn, not to trust our churches and religions in many cases with Pluto and Sagittarius. Pluto and Scorpio brought like the AIDS epidemic. Pluto and Libra brought a wave of divorces, and divorce became much more common, etc. Pluto kind of it's a destroyer, but it ideally it destroys whatever is not good, whatever is not working, whatever is not true. Okay, so weirdly, in a weird roundabout way, there's actually a huge Pluto focus this week. So maybe ponder that a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have for you this week. This forecast ran on a little long because it's a very strange week. Next week, we're going to have a quarter moon, Venus changes signs, and Neptune turns retrograde. So I hope you have a great week. I really do mean that too. Like, despite all the chaos, everything happens for a reason, right? This is a great time for learning. I don't want to learn. I would prefer to just have stability and just live my life and be happy. But that's not. I don't think that's why we incarnated here, right? We came here to learn. We came here during a very dramatic time, not on accident, I think. So anyway, have a fantastic week. Do what you can, um, and maybe I don't know if we can all have some kind of acceptance of the ride, like as best as we can. Um, I don't know. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. I'm really curious to hear what you guys are thinking. But anyway, have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.